Hey everyone, it is Snopik Alawalia from Progress, Texas, and I'm joined by our Senior Strategist, Glenn Smith, Advocacy Manager, Diana Gomez, and Communications Manager, Wesley Story. Today we're going to talk about what's going on in the Texas legislature, the rise of anti-Asian violence, and the increase and milestones in COVID vaccination across the nation. But first, let's talk about something that just came out a few days ago. Y'all might know Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League came out this week. It's clocking in at about 4 hours. That's longer than most Bollywood films that I've watched. Glenn, Wesley, Diana, would y'all watch it? And if not, what is the longest movie you're willing to sit through? Glenn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I once watched a version of War and Peace. It was about 8 hours long, but I was young and energetic. But Justice League, I'll watch it under any circumstance. I can still remember buying a Justice League comic book way back in 1962. That was before I was born, so it was hard for me to buy it, but I did it anyway in a country store in Central Texas, and I've been following the Justice League ever since. So I'm going to watch Zach's cut.
That sounds awesome. What about you, Wesley?
So I'm definitely willing to watch it. I'm a big superhero fan. I love the movies, the shows. And I mean, it's COVID, so we're in COVID time, so I don't really have much else to do. So I don't mind that it's 4 hours long, honestly. I actually enjoy sometimes longer movies. It makes me think more of like if I were going to a play or a musical or something, maybe I'll take like an intermission in the middle of it. But yeah, I don't mind. I think probably the longest I'd be willing to sit through a movie, maybe around like 6 hours or so, but I don't mind a 4 hour movie. So
wow. How about you, Diana?
So I think out of the whole Progress Texas team, I know the least of the superhero fandom and world and universe. I'm more old school. I'm used to a Batman movie with A Kiss from a Rose by Seal. I love that as a kid, with like Jim Carrey as the villain. But so I looked this movie up and I totally forgot about the news that came out about Ben Affleck as Batman. So I'd have to think about Ben Affleck as Batman for 4 hours, making a deep voice. So I'm still borderline on if I would or wouldn't.
That's fair. I'm mixed about it because I saw the original Justice League and I liked it. I'm just curious, like, what else is new? So I guess that means this weekend I'm watching it. So, we are in the middle of the Texas legislative session. A lot of crazy stuff is going on. And one thing we've been seeing a lot this week and is really the Texas GOP is trying to roll back a lot of the innovations that we had in 2020 during the elections. Wesley, what is going on with this attack on our democracy?
Right. So as you mentioned, the Republicans in the Texas legislature have introduced dozens of bills that would limit voting rights in our state, and they're especially targeted at marginalized communities here in Texas. The largest of these bills, or maybe not the largest, but the biggest bill, and the one that's getting the most attention right now is Senate Bill 7. And it also has a companion bill in the House, which is House Bill 6. Abbott has identified this bill as an emergency item, and the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has made it a priority. And basically, the bill is a response to, as you mentioned, Snopik, it's a response to measures that were introduced over the last few years to help make voting easier in our state, especially during 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic going on. Harris County had a lot of voting innovations, and different counties throughout the state had a lot of different innovations. So for example, drive-through voting, we saw a ramp up in curbside voting, people dropping off their mail-in ballots at the different ballot drop-off locations. And so basically this bill is targeting some of those innovations and trying to roll them back basically so that it's harder to vote, because Republicans saw in 2020, we had the lowest margin of victory for Republicans that we've had in a really long time at the statewide level. And then we also saw that more people turned out to vote. And we know that when more people turn out to vote, Republicans don't tend to like that because they know that it's not always in their benefit. And SB 7 is huge, so I mentioned some of it, but some of the other lowlights include that it would require folks with disabilities who want to vote by mail to prove their disability status, which we believe is actually a violation of HIPAA potentially. The bill also would end drive-through voting, or if folks want to use drive-through voting or curbside voting, again, it would make people prove that they are not able to physically go into the voting location. And we know that thousands of people took advantage of that in 2020. And so that's just another option for voting that would be taken away from folks. It would also limit times that people are able to vote. So you would have to go from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And in 2020, some counties expanded voting. They had like 24-hour voting, overnight voting. And so again, for folks who don't work regular hours, that would make it extremely difficult to get out to vote. There's just a lot of stuff in this bill. I could talk all day about it, but let me not take up the entire segment just talking about that.
And you don't have to, because we did a blog about it, and I'm actually going to drop the blog into the chat right now. So if anyone wants to learn all about the lowlights of what Republicans are trying to do, you can check it out there.
Excellent. Let me add a few things about it. I want to start with one of the last things Wesley mentioned about the extended hours voting. Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo was down at the Texas Medical Center a night in October when the extended hours were available. I think at that time it might have been up to midnight. And she encountered a nurse who was just getting off a late shift, and she told her that the polls were still open. The nurse hadn't known it, and the nurse started crying tears of gratitude right on the spot and said, "It's the first thing during the pandemic that's made my life easier." In other words, the extended hours allowed that nurse, frontline healthcare worker during the pandemic, to go cast her ballot. And that's the value of the reforms that were made in 2020 that made voting a lot easier. Now, Republicans are doing what they've done for decades. They're just going to extremes this time by doing everything they can to make it harder and harder and harder to vote. Some people forget that the Republican National Committee was actually under a federal court order dating from 1983, I believe, that prohibited them from doing voter suppression stuff. That order finally expired in 2019. But they're just up to their old tricks. But now they're putting them in the law, and it's taking us back to what's known as the Jim Crow era of the 1950s and before, when there was poll taxes and literacy tests, and other blocks to voting were used against minority Americans. It's a troubling and un-American, un-Texas thing to watch here.
Yeah, Glenn, you've been talking about the Jim Crow Caucus a little bit, and it's getting picked up. I think the other day after you wrote about it, man, my brain is not working properly. I don't have coffee. Who is the amazing woman who worked and did all that work in Georgia? Stacey Abrams used that term too. So Glenn, you're like famous.
Well, I can retire now. That's unbelievable. Stacey Abrams used a frame I came up with. That's great.
Yeah, and like everyone else was saying, this is definitely an attack on voting rights, on democracy in Texas, especially for working class folks that could really use the help of a lot of the really great innovations that happened in Harris County, instead of using that as an example for the rest of Texas to make sure more people have access to this right to participate in democracy, trying to stop it, the most undemocratic thing ever. And Progress Texas actually has a way for folks who are frustrated by this to take action and fight back and let their representatives know in the Texas House how they feel, and to let them know that they won't stand for this, and to let the representatives know in the Texas House and the Texas Senate to stop this from happening. We launched a petition that I think Sophic, you said, has over 1,100.
Last time I checked at 7 a.m. and it was 1,100, so it's likely higher. And I actually just dropped it into the chat for anyone who wants to sign it, and you should.
Yeah.
Excellent. I should point out that there's a good rumor around the state capitol that the Texas House of Representatives Election Committee could hear HB6, next Thursday. I looked at the calendar on the schedule and it's not on there yet, but apparently the chairman is telling people that's likely. So watch for that.
And I believe SB7 is on the calendar for Monday for the Senate State Affairs Committee. And so that's going to be coming up as well. So,
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, there will be likely actions around it. So watch out for us and some of our partners. I think we're going to be planning to really go after the folks who are supporting that bill during the committee hearing and while testimony is happening.
Yeah, and that news just came out recently. So folks that are watching, please sign this petition and share with family and friends. We all need to be in this fight together to protect our rights, because our leadership is attacking them and they won't protect them for us.
And voting rights aren't the only rights being attacked right now in the Texas legislature. We did our latest polling and we found out that people really wanted the Texas Lets to focus on COVID and the energy infrastructure, but 7 bills were just filed about anti-abortion. Diana, what is going on?
Yes, it's just like you said. Progress Texas released this poll, and there was a poll released last month as well from the Tribune and UT. And the poll that Progress did, also showed that the number one priority Texas want our legislators to focus on this session are COVID. COVID relief, the pandemic. It's the number one thing we're all dealing with, and the Texans really need help. Besides dealing with that devastation this past year, Texans are also reeling from the horrible winter storm that we had. And so there are so many more important things to deal with, things that Texans want. And the fact that on Monday morning, the Senate State Affairs Committee spent most of their day listening and introducing and talking about 7 anti-abortion bills attacking our healthcare. They haven't passed, Medicaid expansion. There are so many things they could do to help Texans. And to do this is just a complete waste of time. And it's not listening to medical advice and to what Texans want, actually. But to go on to a better note, there is another bill that folks can support that is the exact opposite of all these bills, and that is the Abortion is Healthcare Act that was introduced and filed last Friday by the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition. And Progress Texas is really lucky and honored to be a part of this coalition of organizations. Representative Donna Howard introduced the Abortion is Healthcare Act. It's amazing. What it does is tries to overturn, it's the bill that is trying to overturn decades worth of anti-abortion laws and restrictions that have been passed in the state. And so this is a really great bill that one of our champions, Donna Howard, is helping us with, and it's something that you can call your representatives and let them know that they should support.
Isn't it really ironic that Republicans talk about freedom all the time, and then all the bills they're filing are taking away our rights, our right to vote, our right to control over our body? It's just I guess it's not surprising, but it's still surprising.
No, you're so right, Sophic. And when you say it's not surprising, it really isn't. I think that Republicans, Texas Republicans especially, but they're really a one-trick pony. It's the same thing every legislative session, just attacking our rights, even when we're in the middle of a pandemic, even after we just had a huge freeze that led to an energy disaster. And I think they're making it obvious that they don't actually know how to govern. They don't know how to lead Texans. They can only ever do the same thing. They can only ever go after abortion rights. They can only ever attack trans youth, trans Texans. That's literally the only thing they have in their toolbox. And it's getting old. And I think Texans are tired of it because we're experiencing the consequences of not having leaders who believe in government. And this is what happens when we don't have people who actually want to improve our state and our lives through governing.
Yeah. And, they so often do it using really hateful rhetoric. And, we've just gone through a massive, we're not even through it. We're still in the pandemic. And I remember the day that Donald Trump for the first time said China flu. And when he said that, everyone in this space right here and every AAPI, Asian American that I know said, this is not going to end well. And then over the course of the year, they kept using new terms, China flu, Kung flu virus, all this garbage. And we said it was going to end badly, and it has. We've seen a huge rise in anti-Asian racism and violence and attacks. And, it comes from this place. And actually, one representative I want to give a shout out to, Representative Gene Wu, he filed a resolution condemning that hate. And, the AAPI community is really excited to see that. And so if you're looking if your rep hasn't signed on, I would encourage you to take a look at it and ask them to sign on, because wherever the oppression is happening, we as Texans, we need to stand up against that thing and stand in solidarity with folks, whether you're trans, black, yellow, whatever the thing is. We need to stand in solidarity with all folks to make sure this kind of hate doesn't exist, because there's no place in Texas.
Absolutely right. I want to second what you said. There was an old saying came from before, but used a lot during the civil rights era of the 1960s that reminded people that if one person is in chains, we're all in chains. And I used I sort of modified that, and I would say the thing about enchaining someone is that you can chain yourself by having to hold the other end of it. So we really do have to stand in solidarity with these forces of bigotry and segregation, and especially the escalating violence against all sort of non-whites. We're all in this together, and we've got to stand with our Asian American friends and fight back against this to contain it and stop it ultimately.
And I also think that, standing, in solidarity with, the AAPI community also means condemning white supremacy and knowing that, Glenn, as you were talking about, like, being in chains and all being together, white supremacy is bad for everyone. It's a terrible, thing that leads to violence for, so many communities of color. And it's so tragic that, it happened this way, especially during, Women's History Month. That this was specifically targeting, a lot of women. It's very important to think about that right now and to condemn white supremacy whenever we see it online, with family, with friends, in all of our communities.
You're so right, Diana. And I think that's a really important point, is that I think for a lot of folks, you think, oh, well, I'm not a part of that violence. I'm not a part of the racist rhetoric. So I bear no responsibility. But at the end of the day, we all have to practice anti-racism actively. It needs to be something that we take part in. And like you mentioned, when we see it, we need to comment on it. We need to call it out for what it is. We also need to elect leaders into office that realize that their words have power, and that when they use that power for hate and fear mongering, it puts a target on people's backs. Just like with the El Paso shooting, just like with the insurrection at the US Capitol, those were tragedies that resulted because our leaders, and I use that term really loosely because they're not leaders, but because our leaders, they continue to target marginalized people and use them as scapegoats for their own failures. So with Trump and his loss of the election and his response to the COVID crisis, he blamed Asians for COVID. And so that put a target on his back. With Governor Abbott and his failed response to COVID and his lifting the mask mandate, he's starting to blame immigrants for spreading COVID. They use these people as scapegoats because they're the ones who are creating these problems, and they're trying to place the blame on somebody else. And it ends up winding up, it ends with people getting hurt or spreading hate, spreading fear. And that's just, we need better leaders in office who recognize that, again, words have power, and when you say something, people listen. When you're in a position like governor, president, when you're in the Texas legislature, people listen to what you say because they think that you're you're a professional. They think that you're representing them. They think that you have access to knowledge that they might not necessarily have access to, and so they believe you. And our governor, our old president, and Texas Republicans, they use that power in ways, they abuse it, basically. So,
right. I don't know if y'all saw what Chip Roy was talking about yesterday, but he turned the whole anti-API Asian American hearing into a thing about like censorship, and he even brought up lynching, and it's like, how is this guy still representing us? It makes no sense. I wish
that's an extraordinary statement from him. Pitching lynching, he was actually kind of framing it as a solution somehow or other. He said, and by the way, he made up what he said was some old Texas saying that I've been in Texas a while, y'all. I've never heard it. I have a lot of friends who've been here longer than me.
Same.
None of them have ever heard it. He just brought up rope and trees and lynching because he wanted to.
So obviously there's been a lot of darkness with COVID, not only, this rise in anti-Asian American sentiments, but just overall the damage that this pandemic has done to our nation and our state. But, we're like nearing the end of the tunnel. And I don't know if you all know this, but today we hit a major milestone with 100 million Americans having at least had their first shot in 59 days. That is amazing. And I know Biden had planned on doing it in 100 days, but I'll take 59 for sure,
No, Savik, that's freaking incredible. And it just brings me so much happiness because I don't know about y'all, but over the past few weeks, I've known a lot more people, friends, family members, relatives, people I work with. I've known a lot more people that have been able to get vaccinated. And I don't know about y'all, but anytime like someone around me, like a friend or relative messages me and says like, oh, I just got the vaccine, I feel a little bit of a weight lifted because I feel less like concerned about people's health, to be completely honest. And this whole time, I think we've been walking around like scared for our parents, scared for our grandparents, scared for those who are in our circles. And because of this accelerated timeline that we have, due to the hard work of medical experts, doctors, people on the front lines, but also we need to give the Biden administration credit too. It's because of his ramped up efforts to vaccinate folks that this is happening. And when you think about where we were just a few months ago under Trump and where we are now, it's like night and day. And I think that many of us see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're finally toward the end of the tunnel, and we're barreling toward it at a faster speed now. And I think that's just something that we should all be excited about, because eventually we're going to slowly make our way back to normal.
Yeah, and I definitely agree in giving Biden credit, especially since he was the one that made it so that teachers could finally get the vaccine. That was such a huge sigh of relief, especially knowing, how dangerous it could be to just go to school and be in the same classroom with other folks, and that teachers were really being put at risk as a part of the frontline workers that we have in this country. So to hear that Biden did that was so amazing, because leadership in Texas wasn't doing that. So that was a really great relief. This afternoon, my dad is going to get his vaccine, and there's been so much misinformation out there, especially targeting the Black and Latinx communities. And it had been so hard to convince my parents to take a vaccine. So I'm so excited to go with my dad and wait in line and have him take that vaccine. I feel like you said, the end of the tunnel's coming, and it's made me so happy.
We should give a shout out to all those Texans, responsible Texans, who have behaved responsibly even without the help of their state government. They wore a mask because they knew it was to protect their family and friends and children and neighbors and work colleagues. And if we're getting near the end of the tunnel, and I hope we are, we got to give credit to all those Texans who sacrifice an enormous amount, not seeing their grandkids, in some cases not seeing their children, not seeing their elderly parents that might be in a retirement center or whatever. These sacrifices weren't easy. And to the degree that we're about to emerge from the real dark days of the pandemic, I give the people credit, and I want to applaud them.
100%. 100%. We might be nearing the end of another kind of tunnel in 2022 if we can get Greg Abbott out of the governor's office. And there's one name that's been flying around a lot, and I want to hear what y'all think about it. Matthew McConaughey. He was in another article recently talking about how he's, he's getting more amped up about running for governor in Texas. But the article points out we don't know much about his politics. If y'all had to guess, what is his premier campaign platform? All right. That's an easy
yes. That is true. I can just envision him at the Capitol starting off a legislative session with those exact words.
Yep. Well, I'll say, just real quickly, I kind of like the mix-em-up of it. I bet he doesn't run, but I mean, a lot of people came out immediately opposed to him and criticizing him. And, I think it helps overall to have a lot of crazy, goofy mix-em-up this early in the cycle. It gets people a little more focused on it than they might otherwise be. And, so I'm kind of for it at the moment anyway.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's folks who maybe would be better candidates, and they might be, treading water, not deciding if they want to run or not. But now they're like, okay, well, this big guy showed up. Maybe it's time to get in the race.
Right.
We talked a little bit about this last week, but I think also for me, the biggest piece really is what are his politics? So I need to see some kind of policy platform or something from him. But this is something that Diana mentioned, and then Glenn again this week as well, about him mixing it up. And I do think that there's value to that. I think that hopefully he can help bring in more interest, and maybe some better qualified folks will run as well.
I agree too. And if, that better qualified person was a person of color, a woman, someone from the queer community, I think for me, the thing that inspires me the most when I see someone running for office is someone that's really experienced a lot of the difficulties in life, that has been negatively affected by really bad policies. And so they're inspired to go into office to fix those policies because of that life experience. And, so it's not just about governing experience, but it's about having a lot of life experience that I'd really want to see. McConaughey's had a lot of, good rom-com acting experience. That's cool. Not specifically what I think would make a great governor, but yeah, like Gleb said, entertaining for now, and hopefully it motivates some other people. Wink, wink. If anyone watching knows anyone else, that would be great.
Well, at Progress, we put together a whole, our way too early list of 2022 candidates. I just dropped it in the comments. Thanks as always for joining us. If you liked today's conversation, we invite you to keep up with Progress Texas every day. Visit us at progresstexas.org, where you can subscribe to our email, as well as follow links to our social pages. If you're listening to this on a podcast, subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app. We will see you next week. Have a good one.
Audio.